It's the dreaded Stagflate tax lie double whammy of stagflation and also shrinkflation. So McDonald's in their Q3 earnings conference call was talking about how they had to raise prices to offset wage increases and also cost increases. Now, I've gotten messages from people in the past under videos and also comments saying that I complain when people ask for wage increases. The point I really want to get across here is that there's two sides to this. So there's the employee side, the side that's demanding higher wages. And I've been an employee before. I've worked in the restaurant industry. Those were all my college jobs. I worked as a server. I worked on the front end of kitchens. And then after work, I would learn how to cook, mostly at Italian restaurants. But also I've been a small business owner. And that's really the other side of this, is that if politicians and bureaucrats try to force higher wages, there are a lot of small business owners out there. And a lot of McDonald's are actually not owned by the McDonald's Corporation. They're actually franchises. So they're actually little small businesses owned by families or a group of people that had to fork over a lot of capital to get a McDonald's franchise. So they're actually a small business where the franchisee had to pay an enormous amount of capital just to run a small business with the McDonald's name. So these cost increases, when an employee asks for a higher wage, the small business owner might not be able to pay it. And as a small business owner, the problems start to come when politicians and bureaucrats try to force higher wages, because then the small business owner has very, very difficult decisions about either letting employees go, firing them, having less employees, reducing their hours so they're not full-time, or to make investments into automation. So all these things are going on in a small business owner's head. And let me tell you, a lot of small businesses are not doing well. They were not doing well before the pandemic. I was hearing in California how the California government, local and state, was forcing minimum wages higher. So a lot of small businesses in California were suffering. And if they're going to keep forcing wages higher, can the small business owner actually pass along the cost increases? So workers cannot just keep asking for higher and higher wages. The profit margins of the business may not be able to support the higher wages. Can the small business owner pass on those cost increases to customers? Or will things happen like shrinkflation? So this is, I think, what most people do not understand. They don't think about things from both sides. Almost all the people who are complaining and sending me messages are not looking at things from both sides. They're only looking at things from the labor rights side, the worker wages side. And unfortunately, this is what government schools and the mainstream media have done with years and years of brainwashing, is that only workers' rights matter. But if you ever want to be a small business owner, or you are a small business owner, you should know, and many of us have also been employees too, that this is not a one-sided argument. You have to look at the other side, because if wages are rising, can we afford to pay the higher costs? Or what's going to happen with our business? Can we maintain our profit margin? Do we have to automate? Can we afford to grow our business anymore? Can we make the investments? So these are all things that we have to consider instead of just being labeled as evil and greedy because we won't pay workers higher wages. It's not that simple. It is never that simple, actually, especially for small business owners who don't get bailouts like large corporations, who can't hire lobbyists to get unbid government contracts that are basically subsidies or bribes or bailouts. Small business owners do not have that type of golden parachute or soft landing like large corporations do. So McDonald's and many other companies are having to deal with rapidly rising costs. It's in every industry. McDonald's, I think, is only raising menu prices, I think, by 6 or 7% right now. Although their labor costs are up substantially and their other input costs are up a lot, I think they're eating some of those costs for now. So it is a complex issue. If you're a small business owner, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I get messages from small business owners all the time talking about how their business is suffering, their costs are rising. If they're in a hardcore Democrat state, the politicians and the bureaucrats are trying to force more taxes, trying to force wages higher, trying to force them to pay higher costs that they might not be able to pass on to their customers. And they're wondering if they should even keep the small business going. It is a mess. And then you have all these other things associated with the pandemic too. all these new pandemic laws. Finally, if you like content like this and want to help keep content like this free so it doesn't all end up behind a paywall, or you want far more in-depth content, research, financial education, and analysis than I provide in these short little free videos, there are now over 180 articles, charts, and audio podcasts behind the paywall, all for the cost of a Starbucks cup of coffee per month, only $5 a month, exclusive for patrons. And I just finally released the Uranium update. It is an audio podcast and a mini article with some PDF investors presentations and some other analysis there. The audio podcast for the Uranium update is around 15 minutes long. And I also just put out, because I'm feeling pretty good today, although my health problems are still not good, day by day basis. For the last 6 or so weeks, my health problems have not been good at all. That is why there has been a lack of YouTube videos and Patreon articles. I don't know if my health problems are ever going to get better as long as I'm trying to run a small business by myself. It is what it is. I don't think my health problems, honestly, will ever get better as long as I'm trying to run a small business by myself. There is also a Q3 2021 update on the gold miners announcing earnings. Their costs are starting to rapidly rise. So that tailwind of much, much lower costs for gold miners, the last 20 or so months, it is ending very, very rapidly and not in a pleasant way. So to offset that, they need much higher gold and silver prices. There are a group of companies that are going to benefit from that. It's not a secret. Precious metal royalty and streaming companies. If you want to learn more about the top two, there's plenty of articles and also in the audio podcast I just put out behind the paywall. So in the last 20 or so weeks, there's now 32 articles and audio podcasts exclusive for patrons, all for $5 a month. I think it is one of the best deals out there. And you can go and check out the Uranium update and the Q3 2021 Gold Miners update and analysis. That took me a couple hours worth of work to get out those two audio podcasts today. So if I could wrap things up very quickly, McDonald's is dealing with stagflation and shrinkflation. The franchise owners of these individual McDonald's, they're going to be the ones making tough decisions. They're going to shrinkflate the menu. The dollar menu ended a while ago in many places, in many different McDonald's locations. I'm hearing that Taco Bell took a lot of the meat items in the last 12 or so months off the dollar menu. A lot of the meat items are off. So like grilled chicken and other things that maybe used to be $1 or around $1, those things are off. I'm wondering if they're going to take ground beef off the dollar menu. So you're starting to see, with rapidly rising food costs and now with wages going up, these companies and especially small business owners are dealing with profit margin compression. So it's not just shrinkflation for the consumer. It's not just stagflation for the consumer. It's the small business owner is trying to figure out how they can survive, if they can pass the costs on to their customer. In some cases, there are clearly labor shortages. So where there's labor shortages, the worker can ask for higher wages. But unfortunately, it is normally the small business owner who is actually getting screwed over the most. Now, I know government schools and brainwashing that you've received in the mainstream media and at universities from your economics professor and other government propaganda is that the workers are always the ones screwed, but it's the small business owner who is getting screwed the most in all of this, unfortunately. So I think small business is the one who is getting killed with the stagflation, the shrinkflation, and labor costs rising more than anyone else. And then there's the supply chain mess and the other shortages. And then if you happen to be in a state that is anti-business, there's even more rules, regulations, taxes, red tape. And on top of that, politicians and bureaucrats are trying to force wages higher if there's not a labor shortage where the worker can actually ask for a higher salary. So it is not fun at all in many cases anymore to be a small business owner, especially if you own a bricks and mortar retail business or businesses or a restaurant.